Judge's Corner is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and GatheringMagic.com. Support our show by visiting both websites. Now it's time for Judge's Corner with David Green.
Hey everyone. In today's episode, I thought we could talk about Bestow, since it'll be coming up a lot at your local F&Ms and drafts. So without further ado, let me bestow upon you the information you need to know for that ability. So Bestow is basically an alternative cost to play enchantment creatures as instead enchantment auras. And they can be attached to things to give their abilities and power and toughness as a bonus to whatever you're trying to enchant. Although, when the thing that they're trying to enchant or the thing that they're currently enchanting is no longer there, they'll simply just be creatures again on the battlefield. Although it's important to note that Bestow cards anywhere other than the stack or the battlefield are exactly what they look like on paper. That means that cards like Celestial Archon can be tutored with Worldly Tutor or even Enlightened Tutor, or Abun Sadar can be targeted in the graveyard with Burial Rites or brought back by Replenish. But since Bestow cards are enchantment creatures and can become auras only when on the stack or in play, they can't be brought back by cards like Retether. So now that you know what they are, let's go ahead and show you how to cast Bestow cards. So when you cast a card with Bestow for its alternative cost, it becomes an enchantment aura spell on the stack, and it ignores all of its creature text. This makes it vulnerable to things like Negate for being a non-creature spell, or Annul for being an enchantment spell. But if you decide to cast it normally, it's now immune to things like Negate because it's a creature spell, but can still be countered by Annul for being an enchantment, or Essence Scatter for being a creature spell. And finally, it's important to note that Bestow is an alternative cost, so that when you cast a card with Bestow, you can always choose to play its regular or its Bestow cost, and that'll give you the Bestow effect. But when you play a card with Bestow without casting it, maybe by reanimating it, you can't bestow it on something else. So now that we know a lot about how to cast cards with Bestow, let's go ahead and talk about how they're affected by things on the battlefield. When a card with Bestow is being cast for its alternative cost and resolves as an aura, it'll enchant the target creature on the battlefield as an aura. This makes it vulnerable to things like Naturalize or Simple of Pure and Simple. But what if the target becomes illegal as the card with Bestow is on the stack and goes to resolve? Well, unlike normal auras that would go to the grave for having an illegal target upon resolution, Bestow cards enter play as creatures, even if the target becomes illegal. This same rule applies for when its target leaves play or dies. Let's say I bestow a Chimera with Heliod's Emissary, and later that Chimera dies from a hero's downfall. What happens to the Heliod's Emissary? Since the Chimera leaves play, Heliod's Emissary doesn't go to the grave like a normal aura would. It instead switches to its normal enchantment creature form. Now, when a Bestow card is played as a normal enchantment creature, it'll be exactly what you see on the card. That makes it vulnerable to things like Murder because it's a creature or Naturalize because it's an enchantment. So now that we've covered a lot of the basics on Bestow, let's take a look at some more complicated interactions you might encounter. So in our first example, I have a Yoke Dox attached to 3 Bestow auras. Then I play Supreme Verdict, destroying all creatures in play because my opponent is simply overwhelming me with their creatures. What happens to my Bestow auras? Because of their Bestow ability, they are only auras and not creatures, making them unaffected by Supreme Verdict. And when the creature they're enchanted to goes away, they all become creatures on the battlefield. And as long as they've been in play since the beginning of my turn, even as enchantments, then they can attack since they're unaffected by Summoning Sickness. It's also important to note that when a Bestow aura becomes a creature after it's in play, it doesn't trigger any Enter the Battlefield abilities. This is because they have already been in play and they just switched card types. So that's it for our episode on Bestow. If you have any questions about this episode or any others that you've seen, or any questions in general, send us an email at judgescorner@gatheringmagic.com. And until next time, remember to bestow upon all of your friends the knowledge you have learned and gained from Judge's Corner. And should all of your layers be organized and caked deliciously, should all of your creatures' replacement effects regenerate them and leave them happily surviving on the battlefield, and should all of your appeals be overturned in your favor, and your deckless problems be warnings or cautions or nothing at all because you have double-checked and triple-checked your deck list when you were asked to by the head judge at the beginning of the event. And should all of your game losses be downgraded, should all of your matches be victorious, should there be no mana flood or mana screw and your draws and top decks perfect and impervious to any error, should all of your shuffles be quick and immaculate, and should all of your games be played flawlessly without error, something to aspire to, and should all of your games be perfectly played and handshakes offered in concession from each of your opponents. And remember, Judge's Corner is the true path to enlightenment.